Oh, Siyo. So I know I haven't updated in a while, and to be honest, that's because I haven't really done anything in a while. I've been having a rough few weeks. I've been learning to play chess. I've been watching reality TV for reasons that I don't understand. And I've been wallowing in misery at the sad state of the world and our democracy. So, so yeah, it's been a bit rough and I haven't really learned that much. I've just like sort of casually been working on my quiz of the syllabary, like the syllabary trainings that I made. And then I've been doing like some reading about traditions that I'm not as familiar with. And I've been creating an elaborate fantasy future life where I move to Tahlequah. I, for some reason, keep looking at like apartments in Tahlequah, even though like I wouldn't even be moving there for like at least another year. In fact, it would be more than that. It would be 2 years. I wouldn't be moving there for 2 years, and and yet I go on Zillow and I just like type in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, and take a look, and the rent is like a quarter of the amount I pay here in the DC area, obviously. And yeah, I think it's a little bit because of like the civil unrest that I like retreat into my fantasy world of moving to Tahlequah because I just like it seems like things are so unstable right now, and if like God forbid we do get into a situation where there's like more things like the January 6th occupation of the Capitol happening, like to be honest, like DC isn't super the place I want to be living in that if that were to happen. Um, so yeah, I've just been like lazing around. I've gone through some changes in my medication dosage and I've been kind of sleepy and stuff, so I really haven't been like in the frame of mind to be like learning a lot and really developing, a clear understanding of like the syllabary and better vocab, let alone making a new vocab set. But yeah, I did watch some videos posted by the Cherokee Nation YouTube. I watched like some of the recordings of just like public meetings where they discussed the language program, which I thought was like interesting. I know it probably sounds like super boring, um, and like obviously I didn't watch everything, but I I thought it was like interesting to give me context on like how these decisions are made and who's making them, like being able to put like names to faces and stuff. So like I don't really have anything to report on today, but I do want to talk for a minute about the whole Pretendians thing that's been happening. I'm gonna get my arms off the table because I'm just making the camera rock. All right, now we're at even keel. Um, but yeah, so those of you who spend time on native Twitter, as I sometimes do, not as often anymore, but as you may know, there has been controversy on native Twitter for a long time about so-called pretendians, which is like pretend Indians. You get the idea. It's not that complicated, but um, recently it came out that one person, I'm not going to talk about their username because it doesn't super matter, but one person made like an Excel spreadsheet of people that they considered to be pretendians. And so then it went back and forth between, people who were saying like, this is really kind of gross, and like isn't representing native culture well, um, and people who are like, we need to root out the pretendians. And like, I get why people are fighting about this. Honestly, I do. Like, I'm very tired of it, and I've always been kind of like exhausted by this issue because like, I know I have a bias because I'm, a low blood quantum Cherokee who grew up hundreds of miles away from Oklahoma, and like I didn't grow up with any knowledge of tradition or ceremony really, besides like the little bits that I would get. And so it's like I always sort of feel myself like in danger of being called a pretendian, even though, like, obviously randos on Twitter's opinion of me doesn't really matter, like, and people in real life are, like, a lot less interested in this dichotomy of, like, real Indians, pretendians. But, like, I've always felt very like I'm a fraction away um from being, like, called a pretendian by some of these people, just because, like, I'm a reconnecting native. But, like, I want to actually talk about my thoughts on it, beyond just, like, my own experience with it. Because I am pretty firmly in the camp that's against the whole idea of, like, calling people pretendians. So I didn't actually script this or anything, so it's going to be a rambly mess, but I'm just gonna talk about my thoughts for a second. So I am pretty firmly against labeling people as pretendians and, like, excluding them from conversations about, cultural revitalization and Native activism because of that. So, like, I understand why people are upset with those who present themselves as Native without, like, really having any community attachment or legitimate, like, ties to Native communities. Obviously I'm a Cherokee, and I've had numerous people who I, talk to, and I say that I am a Cherokee, and then immediately they're like, oh, my great-great-grandmother was a Cherokee princess, or, like, oh, well, my family's Cherokee too, and then they tell me some family story about it, as if, like, to sort of attach themselves to it. And I understand, like, that's part of, like, people trying to make conversation, but yeah, it is super annoying. Despite that, I'm pretty against this kind of, like, dichotomizing of people for two reasons. The first is Black natives, and specifically Freedmen descendants, and the second is those who were adopted out or, stolen from tribes back in the day. So, to start with Freedmen descendants first, it has, as many of you probably already know, been a long-standing controversy in the Cherokee Nation about how those descended from Cherokee freedmen are treated. For those who don't know, the Cherokee Nation participated in chattel slavery in the American South. And after the Civil War, of course, the Cherokees who owned slaves were forced to free those slaves. And those Cherokees, who were called Cherokee freedmen, were supposed to be given the full rights of Cherokee citizenship. And on the Dawes roll, they're designated as Cherokee freedmen rather than saying how much their blood quantum is. Over time, there's been a lot of racism within Cherokee Nation and in the way that the freedmen descendants are treated. And so they've been excluded from tribal membership at times. They've been excluded from participation in Cherokee government. And even though I kind of thought we had resolved this with the Supreme Court ruling, which I'll link to, like, Wikipedia or something if you want to, just last week, a day, I think, after the registration period for tribal elections opened, a Cherokee Nation citizen filed to stop a freedman descendant from running for an at-large seat just because they were a freedman descendant and didn't satisfy being Cherokee by blood. Obviously, I was pretty mad about that. And, this was happening at the same time as the whole Pretendian spat was going down on Twitter, and I was like, right now's not the time to be picking hairs about who's Native, when one of the consequences of that has been Black natives being excluded from participation in our politics. And, like, I understand that a lot of people have this opinion without necessarily wanting it to exclude Black natives, but the effect has been that when we try to create a narrower definition of who's Native American, it ends up excluding specifically the freedmen descendants, but often not just them, but other Black natives who aren't even part of that, because, like, a lot of people see Black natives and assume that they're freedmen descendants. And I'm just worried that discussing Native identity in really black and white terms might lead to more racism in our communities, which I think is, completely unforgivable, basically. So that's my thoughts on that side of it. But to talk about those who were adopted out. So this is another very complicated piece of history, and I'll put some further reading in the description below. But back in the day, by which I mean like during our parents' lifetimes, it was pretty common for children to be basically stolen off of reservations and out of tribal communities. A lot of the times it would be for alleged neglect, which was really just code for living in poverty. And so, a lot of tribes really dwindled because of that. And a lot of people who were adopted out, had no idea who their families were, had no connection growing up to their culture, because that was taken away from them by the colonial structure. And so I think one of the reasons why it's very important to keep pathways open for people to reconnect with their Native heritage is so that people who are adopted out aren't cut off from participating in their ancestors' communities, basically. I know people. I have a friend of mine who was a Cherokee who was adopted out and had no idea that he was even Cherokee until he was in his 50s. And that is really unfortunate, and he grew up not knowing anything about Cherokee. But I don't think that should put him in the category of being a pretendian. And I would hope that if he wanted to really reconnect on a deeper level, that people would allow him to do that with the kind of grace and compassion that he would deserve. So to conclude this just rambling video, I understand why people are concerned about outsiders trying to come into our communities and consume our culture as a luxury good and use a family story to justify racism against natives, or to enable them to express opinions that are anti-indigenous. But I just think that trying to have a really black and white kind of dichotomy about Native identity puts up barriers to people who are trying to reconnect, and to people who have really been robbed of their ability to be part of Native communities by the very colonialistic structures that we are all trying to fight against every day. And I just think that we should avoid doing things that might scare people away from trying to reconnect. Because I think a lot of us are at just different levels of how involved we are with our communities and how much we know. And I think that we should look at people who are reconnecting as not just leeches or people who are trying to get help to get somewhere, but as people who would really be able to contribute, as I hope that I'll be able to contribute when I know more about the Cherokee language and culture. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that tonight. I know that was probably kind of incoherent, but I didn't really have time to write a script, so that's what you're getting. But yeah, so if you have any thoughts that you want to share or want to argue with me, put something in the comments. Don't at me on Twitter, because I'm not going to tell you my Twitter handle. And I would encourage those of you who spend a lot of time on Native Twitter to try to keep in mind that they do not, that the people on Native Twitter do not really represent the broader opinions of all Native Americans, because we're a pretty diverse bunch in a lot of ways, and sometimes it's better just to log off and talk to people in person, because it's a lot easier to connect in an authentic way if you're if you're having to like look someone in the face and talk to them about their identity. So I'm gonna get back to drinking a smoothie and playing chess against myself, because that's the phase of quarantine I'm in. But yeah, I'll try to like actually do stuff between now and my next video. But yeah, I think that is everything I wanted to say. So, dorara go ha'i, and I hope everyone has a great week.